All right, so welcome back. This is part two. There was a faint smell of hookah in the air. The club's lighting was strobing pink and transitioning to blue. Kamala was in her groove. The DJ had a deep house going, and the club was swarming with fun energy. She was pouring drink after drink, and the tips were flowing. As she looked up in between making a drink, she saw someone with their hand up. She walked over to the woman. The lady ordered 4 blue martinis. Kamala nodded and asked if you wanted to open a tab. The woman shook her head no and handed her a crisp $100 bill. She then shouted for Kamala to keep the change. She nodded and smiled. Wow, a $30 tip, she thought to herself. 7 more tips like this and she will have replaced all the money she spent a day for her students' school supplies. As she washed her hands after using the bathroom, she hoped Akshar would come out and take her on a date. She liked his style and his mannerisms, and he was a pretty good-looking guy. She took a seat next to Megan, and this time she pointed her head toward the dance floor. Her locks swung to the left and the DJ queued up a Lizzo song. It was pulling everyone towards the dance floor in some way. As the night slowly faded to a close and last call was announced, Akshar and his team cleared outside. They were making their way inside, making sure nobody was too drunk and ensured everyone was safe under his watchful eye. The lights were about to come up. Kamala had a smile from ear to ear as she closed the register and counted her tips for the evening. She made nearly $800. This was great because not only was she able to make her car payment, but now she had extra cash. Megan met someone that she was interested in and they were enjoying one last drink. Kamala saw they had both their phones out exchanging numbers. She crossed her fingers for Megan, hoping that she meets someone that's compatible with her. She's such an awesome human. Then she got a look and a text message from Megan saying she's taking off with her new beau, giving Kamala the man's address, and he ordered an Uber and they walked out arm in arm. Alon still sitting in his car hours later, he was brooding rage. He was somewhat confused by the sudden blackout and smoke surrounding him, but he felt like it was giving him the power and focus he needed to take Akshar out. He sat and thought of the perfect way to get rid of Akshar. He wanted nothing more than a confrontation. He wanted to ruin him for embarrassing him. He didn't care what happened at the club anymore. He just wanted vengeance and would soon take his first attempt. Akshar scrambled to wrap up with his team. He wanted to try and catch Kamala as she was coming back to the parking lot and ask her out to a diner. All this late work grew an appetite. He stood outside the parking lot and called to Kamala. She answered on the first ring and said, "Oh, so you feeling me, huh? Sure, we can go out. I'm starving myself. I was just going to have a TV dinner if the pizza shop was closed on the way home." They hung up. Akshar nodded in approval. When they hung up, he raced up to the parking lot and got to his vehicle and changed into his original clothing, then went back downstairs. They met back up and he walked her to her car and said, "Follow me." The 24-hour diner was about 10 minutes away, but he did not want Kamala to come back to the parking lot alone, so they drove. They began to drive and got there in no time. They parked next to each other. When they exited the vehicle, Akshar said that this is the best food around here. Kamala was surprised and is looking forward to some good food, for she was hungry as well. They walked into the diner and were quickly seated and began talking. Kamala asked, "Is this their first date?" Akshar was surprised and said, "Well, we are both dressed very nice, so I guess." He confirmed that this was their first date. He was extremely self-conscious and wondered if he would be able to maintain this kind of interaction, as it had been years since he last enjoyed a date. As they were dining and laughing, Kalan was driving and spotted the pair laughing in the window of the diner. Rage boiled up in Kalan and he chose this as the time to act. The light changed and he pulled aggressively into the parking lot, and he decided he would ambush Akshar and his companion. He felt the presence of the black cloud around him once more. His eyes started to glow red and his fists clenched the steering wheel. He nearly tore it from the interior of the vehicle. During dinner, Akshay smiled with Kamala, and the pair conversed and enjoyed each other's late-night company. Akshay paid for their meal, and the two walked out of the restaurant. Kalan quickly got out of his car and yelled at Akshar and held his hands open while quickly closing in on the pair. Akshar turned to face Kalan, pushed Kamala behind him, and said, "Don't do this. It won't end well for any of us." Anger only grew in Kalan. He heard the man's voice in his head, and it said simply, "Destroy him." He felt waves of rage flush throughout his veins, and his eyes started to glow. His face became a bit contorted, and then he said Akshar's name in a guttural tone and charged him. He moved faster than any human Akshar saw before and took him to the ground. Kamala screamed. She wanted to try and intervene, but she was much too small. They were much too large for her to be any use. She started yelling frantically and tried to find her phone to dial 911. Kalan had him on the ground, and he was landing blow after blow to Akshar's face. While vigorously punching, Kalan said,
"You don't remember me, do you? I remember you quite well, and because you do not know me in this life, I win."
Akshar was terrified. This man sounded like a demon. His breath was almost like sulfur. Kamala called 911 and the police were on their way, and she was yelling for help. People ran out of the diner but were afraid to separate the men. "You're killing him," one shouted. Kalan had his hands around Akshar's neck, squeezing the life out of his vessel. Disoriented, Akshar was trying to get his neck free. He pushed his hands up. He tried to kick. He threw elbows and punches into Kalan's ribcage. Someone came running up with a large object and smashed it over Kalan's back, and he did not flinch. Kalan began laughing uncontrollably as he saw the early signs of success. Kalan kept squeezing and squeezing, and Akshar wasn't able to fight back as strongly anymore. Kamala fell to her knees as she saw the life leaving Akshar's body. Tears fell from her eyes. Akshar himself felt like it was almost over. All he could hear was Kalan's evil laugh, his sulfur breath, and he felt the coldness of his hands around his neck. He locked eyes with Kamala, and he saw her sobbing uncontrollably. As he was quickly fading, he felt that he must survive, and he got a sudden surge of energy. His head turned back up to face the demonic-looking Kalan. Akshar growled with all that he had left and delivered a blow to Kalan's ribcage once more. Kalan winced and Akshar seized an opportunity. He landed another blow in the same exact area, and suddenly he was free. Kalan growled and snarled his face. Akshar was able to scramble to his feet and assumed a fighting stance. Each breath he took, he breathed in a cosmic energy back into his vessel. Kalan asked, "You still don't know me, do you?" He backed up, and his face and body started to contort even more. There was now a black shadow surrounding Kalan, and it seemed to take the shape of multiple heads and human arms.
In this life, I am powerful. I win.
Kalan's voice was now totally inhuman. Akshar was absolutely terrified. However, everyone heard sirens approaching. Kalan ducked briefly, and with an evil smile, he said,
By the time they get here, this will all be over. Vishnu.
Kalan rushed Akshar again and was countered. As Kalan missed, Akshar felt a searing pain across his chest. Akshar looked down. His shirt was ripped and he was starting to bleed. 4 lines ripped across his chest. And Kalan turned and noticed his hands started to look like talons. It must be a demon, he thought to himself. The sirens are getting closer and closer. Kalan again rushed Akshar and made contact. Both men are now wrestling in the parking lot of the Met Diner. Once again, Kalan found himself atop Akshar. He tried to block punches and prevent himself from being choked to death once more. Kalan said,
In the afterlife, tell them, Kalemi won. You can't even protect yourself this time, Vishnu.
Suddenly, Akshar was able to flip Kalan over and he finally got the upper hand. Akshar began punching Kalan vigorously. The power of protection started flowing through his veins. As the sirens got closer, Akshar started to shine a blue hue. He was hitting Kalan so fast it seemed as if he had 4 hands beating back the evil that attacked him and Kamala. Kalenmi squirmed and yelped in pain as Akshar started to subdue him. He continued punching Kalenmi into stupor. Akshar yelled, "Somebody give me a belt." A bystander took off his belt, and just as Akshar flipped Kalenmi over with his face bloodied and battered on the cold asphalt in a light rain, Kalenmi retched his possessed body and said, "This won't hold me for long," as Akshar fastened the belt, binding his arms back behind him. As police arrived, Akshar put his hands up and everyone started pointing at the man on the ground, saying that he started it. Kamala ran over to Akshar, who was wincing in pain. The police walked toward Kalan, saying, "This guy literally smells like a skunk and rotten eggs." In an instant, he jumped up from the ground and grabbed the officer's gun while throwing him onto the floor. Akshar heard the commotion as he turned around. Instantly, the power of Vishnu entered his body. He threw Kamala to the side. He shouted, "Everybody get down," and he leapt in the air toward Kalan. As the other officer drew his weapon in the direction of Kalan, Akshar was already there, kicking the gun out of Kalan's hand and delivered a punch that sent him flying backward. Over the sound of shouting officers, you heard flesh tear. As everyone looked over at Kalan, the crowds gasped. He fell onto a jagged piece of metal, and it was now protruding from his body. He devilishly looked at Akshar and said,
I almost beat you, Vishnu. I will be back next time, and I will win.
Kalan's body went limp and everyone saw a black cloud of smoke leaving his body. It was at this moment Akshar fell over. He was in complete shock. He vomited. The moment was over. Akshar defeated a demon. So thanks for tuning in and listening to this Halloween episode. Stay with me though. There's one more part and you guys will not be disappointed. So happy Halloween. See you guys soon.